Hello, listening audience, and welcome to another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Productions. This is your host, Michael Cross, and tonight we're going to be treated to a very interesting analysis of what's going on in the Middle East from, well, I'll just say her name's Jonanna Fagerberg. She is a former student of mine who studied psychology in my courses and then went on to get her degree in business management and now lives in Lebanon. So let's find out what people down in Lebanon are thinking about a lot of these world events that seem to be dominating our foreign policy news. Hello, Jonanna.
Hi.
So, what city are you in?
I'm in Beirut.
Okay.
Living in Beirut since the past 2 years, so almost since the beginning of the war in Syria. So I've been able to see the beginning of the war and its effect on the neighboring countries, and up until the moment that now, like, the whole Western world is starting to put their focus on what's actually happening in the region. So it's quite interesting, the development we've had the past years.
Okay. I just want to tell our audience that having a little bit of problem with internet connections, and you explained that that's because of the war in Syria and just the internet in the Middle East.
It's basically, Lebanon is one of the countries. There's a lot of countries in Africa actually that have that have better access to electricity than Lebanon. But Lebanon is, sad to say, a very corrupted country, whereas you have to pay like hundreds of dollars per month to be able to have electricity at home. But at the end of the day, it's still not provided for you by the government. So it's been always a huge problem since actually the end of the war.
Okay, and you're talking about the civil.
So
you're talking about
the civil war, and so the civil war in Lebanon, exactly. So basically now when you have at least 1.5 million around registered Syrians, basically the pressure is even harder on the general electricity that already exists in the country. So that's why it's worse, because of the war. But it's always been bad regardless of the stability in the region for Lebanon's after the civil war.
Okay, what I want to ask is, lately.
Yes.
Lately, we've been seeing that Russia is taking a major role in that region. China,
yes,
surprisingly, has sent, an aircraft carrier to Syria. Mm-hmm. And essentially, you have a chance to see both Western media, like Swedish media, American media, and so forth, and also Arabic media.
Yes.
Before we go deal with Russia and China, what do people in the region generally believe is behind ISIS?
A lot of the Lebanese, like at least the people that I know, which you would say is upper middle class, or the very small percentage of the more fortunate people, let's say, here in Lebanon, most of them have received education from abroad. So many of them are very well, internationally educated. So let's say, for example, many of them hold American or French or something like that passports. They've studied abroad and things like that. So they don't come with this super Arabic perspective of things, but they've really been abroad and they've studied abroad and they've grown up with different cultures and different religions. So the shared opinion of everyone is obviously that what's behind ISIS is the United States. And it's very different to talk to someone. For example, I have a Syrian driver at work, which is quite funny, and he's been saying to me in Arabic since the beginning of the war that he's explaining with his very Arabic that's actually very hard to understand because he's from a Syrian village, where he says Daesh, which is the actual name of ISIS in Arabic, and he says America, and he says allies. So this is what he's been saying from the beginning, but I didn't want to base my opinion on something that my driver at work tells me. I wanted to, at least if it comes from somewhere, someone or something that actually tells me that this is a fact. And at the end of the day, if you look at the amount, of the huge population that actually Syria has, and all the people that could actually, you could actually help these people, and have the army going up against them. But it's not in the economical interest of supporting Bashar al-Assad. So therefore, you put your soldiers in your own way. And I think that's very clear, since the Al-Qaeda was also trained by the CIA. And it's actually written in the Swedish media that the United States have been educating soldiers to be on ground. And I think I read an article yesterday saying that there were only like 5 soldiers still on ground that they've trained to become a soldier on ground for the United States interests. So yes, this is the opinion of others.
Yeah, I read an article recently that said a whole bunch of people that had been trained allegedly for the United States supporting this Free Syrian Army. The
Al-Nusra, I think, also.
Yeah, they defected to
exactly
Al-Nusra, and all the training and all the weapons are now Al-Nusra.
Exactly.
Which I think is ironic, because just a couple weeks ago we had all the, let's remember 9/11 and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think most Americans realize that, well, when you're remembering 9/11, you should consider who might be getting money today over in the Middle East.
Exactly. So, and I think that what most people, like, regardless of which media you read, no one is ever going to actually tell you, like, okay, because at the end of the day, as you say, that what's one's bread is another one's death, is that there's obviously someone or a lot of people that are making a lot of money on these wars. Like, there was someone that was saying to me here in Beirut a few weeks ago, saying that the amount of money that each bomb that they are now dropping over Syria, the amount of money that someone is making from that is just, that's like more than the actual, money that UNICEF is getting for actually helping the people of the world. So it's obviously a question of economics. Someone is making money out of it, and as long as that side is, feeling that it's going for them, they're not going to care at the end of the day if who has to take care of the refugees and how many children are dying. So it's all a question of economical interests. Just like you can see on the invasion of Iraq, they never actually found any mass destruction weapons.
Yeah, and that's one thing I find ironic in much of the mainstream European media is they deal with the refugee issue as if it just popped up without actually looking at what preceded it a year or two earlier.
Exactly. I remember actually, Michael, when I moved here, and so I moved here in August 2013, sorry. And the war started in March 2011. And I was actually in Syria, in Damascus, in October 2009. No, actually 2010. So that was just a few months before the war. And I remember it as one of the most amazing trips of my life. It was like going back 40 years in time. It was like, how people were dressed in the 70s with the hair and the wide pants and everything. It was just like that. It was crazy. I thought I was staying at the Four Seasons. I thought I was in the Saddam Hussein's documentary of his life. It was just insane. I was the only female there. And so I had seen Syria, and I knew what it was, and I was familiar with the politics, that they were a dictator and everything. And then when the war started, my mother was telling me that they're doing a revolution in Syria. And I told her it's not a revolution. And she's like, but it's, it's a follow-up on the Arab Spring, with Tunisia and Libya and all of this. And I told her, listen, it's going to I don't know how long it's going to take, but you're going to see that eventually you're going to find out that it's all terrorists. There was never a Syrian revolution. There were, of course, people that can say now, like, yes, we were not happy with having a dictator, but at the end of the day, they had free healthcare, they had free schooling, they had a safe society. There was no discrimination between different religions. A friend of mine who's Syrian, who grew up between Beirut and Aleppo, she's like, I used to come to Beirut as a child, and I would ask my dad, what is a Muslim? And he would say, where did you learn that word? Because in Syria, you would not differentiate people from what religion they had. So we all knew in the region from not a question of revolution. This was not, and it had nothing to do with the Arab Spring whatsoever. It was only is coming in to take over an area, and I told this to my mother, wait and see what is going to happen. And then she saw it, she's like, oh my God, you were right. And I was like, well, don't believe what people tell you just because it sounds like it makes sense, because that was just a cover-up to do this whole operation, actually.
Well, I've noticed that in the alternative media, or I will say the independent media, you will see these kinds of reports, but in the mainstream media, you don't. Do you have an idea of why it is that you hear what is going on in the Arabic media, and as well as dealing with Arabic people, and yet you notice that the independent media tells you the same thing, whether it's from America or Europe, but then the mainstream media, the big corporate media, is telling, well, something, but it's not what's going on down there.
Yeah, they're more like reporting what, let's say, if something happened, but they wouldn't necessarily say why it happened and what, the conflict is connected to, I think.
Okay, so in other words, something happens and then you just deal with it, and then maybe
it's like a notice, like, oh, this, as I was saying about these bombings happening in Saudi Arabia, I didn't see it on any Swedish news, and I was very surprised, because I was like, that's like a major, huge thing, because obviously Saudi Arabia is a huge, whether you look at the Middle East of the whole world, they have a huge impact into what's happening in the whole world because of their, strength in terms of economics. So I was very surprised that the Swedish media wouldn't even talk about it. They wouldn't even put a notice. Meanwhile, in like the rest of the world, it was like, oh my God, ISIS bombing in Saudi, and it's like, whoa. So I found that a little bit interesting, yeah.
And of course, in the American media, the big news would be if Kim Kardashian's getting another picture of her rear end.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I find that very interesting as well. I have to say something about like what's just happened in the Swedish media now with the whole I want to help hashtag, whereas all these people, like a huge, I don't know how many, but like everything from celebrities to anything from like moms with kids and people that have companies, they just went together and like gave a huge and crowdfunded a huge amount of money to give to these refugees that are now coming to Europe. And then part of my work actually here in the Middle East is working with different NGOs that are working for children, both local and international, that are having their local NGOs here. And I'm seeing like UNICEF they don't have enough money to provide basic needs for these refugees in the camps, where these people actually can be helped. And then people are not putting money there, but they rather put money into being able to show on their Instagram that, oh my God, I just gave $15 to hashtag I want to help, and it's not even about the fact about helping. It's just about, as you say, like what is egoism, what is selfishness? Is it really about doing something good for someone else, or is it about making you feeling better about yourself by doing something good? So I found, and that took, still now, that's like 2 weeks ago, and it's just taking up like, if you scroll through like any of the bigger Swedish newspapers, it just takes up half of your newsfeed about, oh, I want to help, and oh, I gave this, and oh, I gave that. It's like, well, first of all, start providing the basic needs of people and start asking yourselves, why is this conflict still going on? I think that's my personal opinion.
Well, that's going to get me into something here, and that is, now, what I promised earlier. Russia has now stepped up its assistance of Assad.
Yes.
And they want to basically, it sounds like the Russians are very serious. They want to actually just get rid of ISIS.
Yes.
Obama, I've tried to find out exactly what is going on. Does he, it seems like maybe the United States bombs a wheelbarrow here and there, once in a while to stop ISIS. You see these giant caravans of, and their pickup trucks and their weapons and stuff, and you're going, well, wait a minute, doesn't America have all these drones that can just go in there and take care of it? I've heard some horror stories about, when the Iraqis were fleeing, the Iraqi military was fleeing from Kuwait, And America just went through and basically mowed thousands and thousands and thousands of Iraqi soldiers down.
Oh my God!
And
In which year was this? In the Kuwaiti?
Yeah, this was in the early 90s.
In the 91, yeah.
Bodies for miles and miles. And the thing is, it seems like that if that's possible, if they were able to carpet bomb Libya to go after Gaddafi, then it seems like, Egypt, they say that, they threatened after some Christians were beheaded from Egypt that they were going to bomb ISIS, and America came out, wait, maybe you shouldn't do that. And now Russia's in there like, this is a provocation. No, Russia, you shouldn't be doing it. Now the Chinese are coming in on it. And what are the Arabic peoples thinking about Russia and maybe now China coming in and hooking up with the Kurds, Iran, Hezbollah, and all these other organizations?
I mean, the thing is, which I find very, very, very interesting, is that Russia has a military base, which is based in Syria, since I don't know how long, but they have apparently this, I don't have confirmed information on like the size and the importance of it, but basically it's it's like their fleet base, which is based here in Latakia on the Syrian coast on the Mediterranean. So I find it very interesting that this is also not something that you're reading about in the media, saying that Russia actually has an interest in being present and actually taking part of this war because they have a huge military base here since before. And that makes a major difference, I think, in terms of why are they interested in being present. So, I mean, it's like you would have, like you have American military bases like
everywhere,
all over the world. And obviously if there would be something like some kind of war or something threatening, which is like the biggest base, let's say, outside of the United States, obviously you would want to protect yourselves and protect that country because they're an ally of yours in some way. And I find it very interesting that no one is talking about that. They're just saying that Russia is going in to fight ISIS, but they're obviously protecting their own assets.
Mm-hmm.
So,
how do Arabs feel about this? Do they feel that the Russians are doing a good thing or a bad thing?
But that's the thing, that the Russians knew that like the Lebanese, for example, and the Syrians, they always knew that there was this Russian base here. So they were always like, okay, the Russians are on the Assad side, they're on the Syrian regime side. It hasn't even been a question of, at the end of the day, I don't even think the Middle Eastern care who comes in and who helps. They just don't want war anymore. I mean, if you look at a country like Lebanon, that it's like 3 million people, and then you have like 800,000 Palestinians, which are in their camps, and then you have like 1.5 million Syrian refugees, and you have a huge population of Armenians as well. They're like, and plus they had their own civil war. They're like, just go away. Like, we don't care what you do or who does what. We just don't want any more war in this region. This is like the main thing of people, to be honest. Like, I hear people here discuss less the war than people discuss it in Europe. Like, people always ask me like, oh my God, how is it to live in Beirut now? And I'm like, we don't see anything. We don't hear anything. Like, for example, when there were last year for in Palestine, when there was the bombings between Israel and Palestine, I mean, there were no demonstrations, there was nothing, absolutely nothing happening in Beirut, which is a super close location. But in Europe, everyone was just going crazy about it, and we were like, oh, okay. So it's just the Middle Eastern people, they just don't want, they're not as concerned about who's doing what. They just don't want there to be war anymore. But that's what they realize, that no matter how much they try to rebuild their countries and how much they try to have their own, can maintain a stability with all these different religious groups and ethnic groups and everything living together, they just can't do anything about it. Because if someone like a huge country like the States or Russia or China, if they have economical interest in the region, then they know that that's going to, destroy their lives and their countries, and there's nothing they can do about it.
Okay, so at the end of the day, if Russia and China clean up ISIS, they're going to actually probably gain a level of respect and support in the Middle East that they didn't have before.
I would probably say so, because that's the thing, that, as I was saying, that people they just want peace. They just don't care where, who it comes from or from where it comes from. They just want peace. They just don't want people to have, to fight each other. And
that's actually a very interesting point, too, I have to bring out, that in the American press, the way that the American press depicts the Middle East, especially Muslims, it doesn't seem to matter which, whether they're Shia or Sunni or whatever.
I don't even think people know that there's a difference between Shia and Sunni.
No, and the thing
to be honest.
And the thing is, that has really helped in like how Bush got and Blair got, the war going in Iraq and so forth. But the thing is that the media seems to present it like the people in the Middle East are just all wanting just to pick up guns and shoot, because that's the pictures they always are shown.
Exactly.
And people I know that are from the Middle East tend to be very analytical and not hot-headed at all.
I mean, hot-headed, I would say, like, that's a cultural thing. Like, it's like if you meet an Italian, how he would, speak with his hands and be loud. And, they're definitely more loud and more like, they have a lot more passion in their blood, I would say. That's how they explain it themselves, at least to me. Then you would say like a Scandinavian, they don't even say hi to their neighbor after 20 years. But they're not afraid of speaking up and saying things. But they are definitely, as you said, like they're a lot more analytical, because at the end of the day, they grew up with having, war and conflicts constantly going on, whether it's in their country, it's surrounding them all the time. So they definitely have a different way of looking at things, where they ask themselves, okay, now this is happening in Syria. Why is it happening in Syria? Okay, they don't, actually what I've learned is that they never really pick a side where they would say, okay, the Assad regime is the bad guy. They would say like, okay, there are bad things in every way, but you have to deal with it. You just have to simply deal with it. It's not that easy to just go into a country and say, okay, there's a dictator. Okay, let's remove the dictator. And then, let's create a democracy. This is people that lived under oppression for like 50, 60, 100 years, depending on the country. And these people don't know what democracy is. Like if you look at the so-called revolution in Libya, at the end of the day, it was just a lot of people screaming and shooting and going into the palaces of Gaddafi and just, destroying everything and stealing everything, because they believe that, okay, I'm poor and I'm oppressed and he's rich, so he shouldn't be rich unless I'm rich. But then they have no actual solution to who can actually take over, who can actually make this country better than him. So that's what I'm seeing now, like a lot of Syrians that are here in Lebanon, and they're saying like, yeah, but Syria, yes, we were oppressed, there was a dictator, but we did have free healthcare, we did have free schooling, we were not, oppressed because of our religion or because of, because we were Christians or Kurds, or, they had their rights. So
if they had the ability to go back, let's just say Russia and China are successful.
Yeah.
Because I don't think America's really successful at what, regardless of what's true or not, or what level of involvement, was it somewhat facilitating, was it directly, whatever. Mm-hmm. It seems the Russians and Chinese are serious about this. Of course, they have their agenda too. But if the war ended tomorrow,
yes,
most of the Syrians, they would want to go back and rebuild and start their life over again.
I mean, that's the thing, like, if you look, like, now, like, it's a very complicated question, because I was actually reading an article today that was saying that whenever a population becomes, it's not poverty that makes people go away, it's actually when you become like middle class that you actually want to go somewhere. So the people that are going to Europe, and I'm not saying the majority, but there are a lot of people that are, that are able to pay these smugglers, thousands of euros and dollars to actually get to Germany or Sweden or wherever they want to go. These are people that had some means in their country. So I think that ideally you would want to go back to where you came from, but then you wouldn't be able to go back to a country that you don't have, where you don't have anything that you used to have. You know, you used to have your normal life, you used to have your house. Let's say that your house was bombed and your children's school is bombed and none of your neighbors are living there anymore. You know, what are you going to go back to? But actually what I think it's going to be is that, for example, the Lebanese are saying that it's a huge opportunity for the Lebanese economy to actually build up Syria and make money out of it. So it's actually, I believe that it's going to be more the neighboring countries that are going to benefit from it. And to be very honest, when you live in a country like Lebanon and you see it, when every time someone with a passport, that's the thing. When you come from a Western society and with a Western passport, you know, you want to go on vacation. The only country I ever had to apply for a visa for was for Russia. Except for that, I can just book my ticket online and go. But these are people that constantly, every time they want to go somewhere, they have to apply for a visa and they can get denied for absolutely no reason, although they can show that they have assets to support themselves on their vacation or whatever. So it's actually a question of getting a European passport, which is actually a huge aspect of why people want to go.
Okay.
Which is weird, which is actually really weird because it's not something that you would consider yourself because you never had that problem yourself. But, you know, they say like, okay, let's go live in Sweden and we get the Swedish passports and then eventually they will move back, you know, when things would calm down and it's been rebuilt for a little bit. But it doesn't mean that they're going to just, if the war stops tomorrow, it doesn't mean that people are going to stop fleeing. It doesn't mean that people are going to go back. Yeah. Because they want something better and, you know, they want a European passport because it's very helpful for them both in terms of business and both in terms of travel. And it's also a question actually a bit of status. If you are a foreign passport holder, it means that you're a little bit better than everybody else.
I know that when I was in Istanbul about 10 years ago, I was told by a family I spent time with that many upper class people in Turkey, when the wife is like 7 months pregnant, they take a vacation to the United States.
Yeah.
So she can give birth in America. And
exactly.
what the woman told me was that this was, to a large degree, kind of a safety measure, just in case the government or something, you know, because Turkey's kind of split down the middle. You got people that are very Islamicist and people that are very secular, more like European ideals. Even though they're Muslims, they're very secular.
Yeah.
The secular people are scared, which usually the upper class. They're scared that someday it could revert and then they become more Islamic and therefore they'd want to leave. And an American passport would be very good for that.
Exactly. So, and this is something that is not really, you know, this is something that's very, very hard to explain to someone. For example, if I would sit with like a Swedish friend of mine and I would say, but you know, they're like, no, but these people are fleeing from war and, you know, they just need to have a roof over their heads. And I'm like, these are a lot of people that have been since the beginning of the war, even from before the war. They've actually been living in Lebanon or in like Kuwait or Qatar or Saudi Arabia. And now they're seeing their chance to go to Sweden and actually get the passport. They're like, no, it's not like that. I'm like, yes, it's like that. You know, I'm not saying that everyone is like that, but as you were saying, you know, it's a safety net for these people and actually to facilitate something in their lives that they've always had to struggle with. And now they're seeing their chance to actually to not have that struggle anymore, regardless of the situation of their country.
That is actually very, very fascinating. It might explain why there's a lot, demographically, there's like 3 in 4 are young men.
Yeah.
Because are they, I mean, you're down there. I mean, do they leave their families there, or are these young men who are kind of like you said, they're trying to have a better life, and so therefore this can give them that opportunity?
Well, you know, if you consider the Swedish and I guess German as well, the immigration law says that if you arrive to a country and you get the right to stay, then you have the right to bring your closest family. So as it's written in the media that the men have a higher chance of survival, on this road to Europe that is not very safe with the boat and walking and crossing borders and everything. But that's the thing, that they know that the day that they get their what do you call it in Swedish, the right to actually stay, the nationality and everything, then they know that they can bring their whole family. So it's just about sending the one person first for the others to be able to follow after, actually.
Kind of like, well, I'm going to use a parallel, just like the Irish would often, when they had their famines to a large degree, facilitated or caused by the British, but you would send maybe a young man over to work on the railroads in America, or the mines, or building those big skyscrapers and stuff. And then they would bring over one family member, then another, and then another and another, because they could only afford passage for one person.
Yeah, and I think, if you consider now there's like this massive amount of children arriving to Sweden. They're coming alone, I don't know, how you dare to send your child. First of all, those children are not traveling alone. They are traveling together with, let's say, neighbors or other family members. But the fact that you send one child, and then that child legally has the right to be reunited with her parents or his parents, which means that, okay, so we send one child, we sacrifice one child, that experience, to be able to come, all of us, afterwards, because they know that it's faster than to send a parent before, in a way. Okay. Because automatically every child that arrives in Sweden without a parent, they actually get the permission to stay.
Okay.
So this is pretty much how it works, from what I understand it from the Middle Eastern perspective.
Yeah, I think it's the same in the United States too. Like, a lot of children have come up from like Honduras and places like that, and they're not, you just don't stick them on the border and say go back. They are allowed to stay in that case. Well, anyway, we're kind of coming down to the end here. If you want to leave an impression with people, because again, I think that a lot of times the media gives this impression of the Middle East as just being this area where no one gets along. It's just what I meant by hot-headed was, people taking to the streets for any cause whatsoever. I actually like it when people are more emotional and stuff, and actually have some passion in them. And, that's why I like Italy so much. Is the people, they actually act like they're enjoying talking to you instead of just staring at you like a robot.
Or looking at you weirdly because you're talking to them and you don't know them, and they're like, whoa, who's this weird person talking to me? And it's like,
the thing is, what would you like to leave people with an impression of? What, would you suggest they come and visit Lebanon? Are you there again?
Hello?
Are you back? Let me start recording again.
I can hear you again.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll start recording.
Yeah.
Okay, got cut off again. Would you suggest people, like, if they are curious, that they should visit a place like Lebanon and see what it's like?
Of course. That's what I always say to my friends. Whenever we have I have a background where I did study politics, and where I learned actually to question, what am I being told and what is actually the truth, and the truth might seem very clear if you only have one side of the story. So I always say to people, come to Lebanon, come and see how it is. And they're like, oh my God, but there's like war. And I'm like, no, if you think distance-wise, Damascus is like 300 kilometers from Beirut. So in terms of distance, it's just like around the corner, but it doesn't mean that we're living the war here. And yes, there's the ISIS on the borders, and Hezbollah is fighting them in the mountains, which is 30 kilometers from Beirut. But it's still very important, I think, when you consider yourself to live in this global world where information is being so widely shared, instantly all the time, and you have this freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and you can think and do and say whatever you want, and then you only surround yourself with like-minded people that grew up in the same type of society than yourself. And when you go on vacation, you go to Thailand or Greece or New York, or you spend time with other like-minded people. You know, I think that it's very important when you have the opportunity to go and see, to actually do it. Because I think at the end of the day now, with the huge immigration that Sweden is receiving, and that we're actually that we are going to have to integrate. They are not forced to integrate, that we are going to have to integrate these upcoming years. I think it's very important for people to actually understand what background do these people come from, what type of culture do they come from. And I think it would be better for Western people to actually have more of an on-ground experience rather than what you're saying, that what they're seeing in the media. So I would definitely, I always say to all my friends and family to come and visit me here, you know, to be able to have more of an understanding of the type of cultures and background that these people come from.
Okay, well, great. Well, thanks a lot for sharing your insights tonight, Johanna.
Thank you very much, Michael. It was great talking to you.
Oh, great. Well, you two take care now.
Yes, you too.
What I'd like to do here for the next few minutes is answer a question that I received recently while doing one of my broadcasts. And the question was, how does a psychopath actually look at the world? What do they see? Now, the thing is, in my book series, Freedom from Conscience, the protagonist or anti-hero, Melanie, she provides a window for the reader to be able to see how a psychopath actually looks at the world. And so, you know, if you get a chance, you know, you can take a look. It's really quite interesting, and it's quite a bit deeper than I think most people think. I think a lot of times when you hear people talk about psychopaths, they're discussing it in a context of hurt. Usually, when you find YouTube videos, someone will put that up when they've been hurt by a psychopath. And obviously, they're going to want to portray such people in the most negative light. Now, I'm not going to sit here and present psychopaths as, you know, the next best thing to Christmas or something like that. What I'd like to do, though, is at least show how they see, through their eyes, people and their environment. Now, first of all, I just want to point out, one of the things that distinguishes psychopaths, and, you know, when I hear people say, oh, I wonder if I'm a psychopath, and this is one of the first questions I ask them, is, do you feel empathy towards others? Can you put yourself in another person's shoes on a regular basis and actually really relate to where they're at and feel a great deal of connection to that person or their plight? Now, most people say, well, yeah, of course I do. And then I'll try to distinguish it from sympathy. Sympathy means, like, you know, you see someone break their leg and you're kind of like, wow, that really sucks. That's, you know, it's too bad they did that. I wish they hadn't. But empathy is far deeper, where you're actually maybe even feeling pain, maybe feeling discomfort for that person's plight. Now, the vast majority of people will say, of course I feel empathy on a regular basis. And for people other than just my most immediate loved ones. Well, that pretty much shoots down the idea you're a psychopath, okay? Because that's one of the big red flags, is not being able to feel empathy. Now, the other big red flag is guilt. Again, I was talking to someone the other day. He was like, well, sometimes I really relate to villains on TV, so I wonder if I'm a psychopath. And I said, well, when you do something wrong, how does it make you feel? Do you feel really bad? Does it kind of give you a bad feeling in your stomach? Do you feel remorse that just eats away at your conscience? Or do you feel it more like when something goes wrong, you feel disappointment that you didn't do something different because Maybe you're having to suffer certain consequences for an action. Maybe, you get caught messing around on your girlfriend and she breaks up with you. Well, most people will say, no, I feel the first one. And that, again, the other big red flag. You're probably not a psychopath if you feel empathy and you feel guilty for doing things, that are wrong. Now, that's not to say that psychopaths are totally devoid of guilt and totally devoid of empathy, but it would be kind of like this analogy. When you're looking at your computer, when you're on Wi-Fi, maybe in some kind of remote area, and sometimes you have all those little bars lighting up, which means you have a good connection. Okay? The signal's going to come into your computer from the internet pretty good. But sometimes it's down to that one little minuscule bar, the little tiny one. Your internet is incredibly slow. Some things you can't actually bring up on the page, especially if they're really complicated. And that analogy really fits the way psychopaths are towards empathy and even sometimes guilt. So, yeah, they can feel it, but it's at such a diminished level, it's almost inconsequential. And often, if they're able to, the one distinguishing feature that a lot of people aren't aware of, it's been researched to prove this, is maybe what they're able to do also is able to turn it on or shut it off at will. So they can choose. Maybe they feel they're in a situation where maybe they should feel a little bit of empathy. And they can actually coax themselves into doing so. But now I want to deal then with what do you have when you have one of these individuals? And statistically, it's 3% of the male population, 1% of the female. But I think it's higher for females than 1%. I think ultimately we tend to see women in a different light, even when they do the same exact thing. Look at like murder trials. If a man and a woman are both arraigned for doing the same exact crime, invariably the male is assigned such things as, oh, he was evil. Whereas, if he does something really nasty, evil, mean, cruel. Women, oh, she's at the worst disturbed. But what caused it? Maybe it was hormones. Maybe it was, some sort of mistreatment she received. You see, it's still in society, we tend to look at the female as the victim and excuse her own center of control over her life. So I think ultimately, if in psychology, women doing the same thing or feeling the same thing that a man would, and he would get the label of psychopath, sometimes the woman gets a label of borderline. Perhaps there's been some research to suggest that some borderlines are actually psychopaths. Although it is borderlines tend to be very emotional, but still some of the other traits do overlap. Now, let's just say though, statistically, 3 out of 100 men and 1 out of 100 women. That means if you're in a room right now with a whole bunch of people, there's probably 1 or 2 psychopaths around there. So anyway, how do they see? Well, first of all, one thing that I think is somewhat troubling about psychopaths, especially the ones that make it big in politics, is that they, like all other people, believe that everyone thinks the way they do. Okay? Most regular people, they think that everyone cares. They see a politician talking about, the plight of unemployed people, or the plight of a endangered wildlife, or anything, and they even see them looking like they're going to cry, and they think that person must be feeling what I would feel in my heart. Well, not necessarily. Not all people think the way that you, the listener, are thinking. If a psychopath is really devoid of feeling guilt and empathy, they also will feel that other people are exactly the way they are. Now, many times psychopaths also think in a very Machiavellian manner. Even though this is distorting his quote, the ends justify the means. They see life as a cost-benefit analysis. If I do this, what do I get? If I do that, how will that affect my position in life? How will this cause people to like me, hate me? How will this cause someone to perhaps get a job, advance in their job? This is the way a psychopath is thinking all the time. But they also are going to have a certain level of paranoia because they think every single person is willing to do whatever it takes to succeed at whatever goal they choose. So the psychopath is going to be somewhat paranoid and have a negative view towards people. I heard somewhere, I haven't been able to find any study to verify it, but psychopaths, actually I did read, but I didn't actually look up the exact study. It was just a report in the press. That psychopaths are more likely, when asked, people that score high on psychopathic traits, it's a continuum. It's not like, yes, you are, red light. No, you're not, green light. It's more of a continuum along a spectrum. And the interesting thing is that people that score high on psychopathic traits tend to be very conservative when it comes to criminal justice issues. Now, you would think they'd be a little bit liberal, like, well, what if I get caught one of these days? No, actually, if they're projecting, they're thinking the criminal that got caught is going to have kind of that dark soul, that dark empathy that is often associated with psychopathy. And therefore, the psychopath is going to be more worried about letting them out on the street. Yeah, I mean, who knows how many district attorneys are actually psychopaths? And the reason why they're successful at what they do is because they are looking at themselves in the context of, what if that was me? What would I be saying right now? Well, of course I'd be saying this or doing that and trying to get off and playing on the sympathy of the jury. And maybe the DA, who might also be a psychopath, maybe as much psychopathic as the person that's being on the stand and being tried for whatever crime. So, that district attorney is going to want to make sure that person doesn't walk the streets. And so, again, if you're not acquainted with Machiavellianism, you need to look it up, because essentially that is how the psychopath thinks. So, does that mean they're calculating? Absolutely. Now, think of everything you do in life is calculating. There's one scene, some people have told me they really like it in my first book, and that's the first few pages where the main character is sitting and just, she's reflecting over when she was in high school, but she's like sitting in a school cafeteria in college or university. And she's analyzing the people around her, wondering what makes them tick. Who are they? What is their story? Much the same way that a person setting up an animal documentary might look upon the animals that they're filming. And this is the way a psychopath will think. Very analytical, very looking at people and trying to size them up. And I cannot say I can put my finger on exactly what it is in psychopathy that allows psychopaths, even though they're feeling very little emotion, to be able to really tap into other people's emotion. Okay, maybe it's an energy or something. Maybe sometimes you get negative, positive energy come together, and perhaps the person with negative energy is able to determine things that most people can't. But they're very good at knowing how people think, and therefore how people are feeling, and also how to connect to those feelings. Okay? Very important concept there. So this is why psychopaths make really, really, really good salespeople or spokespeople. Marketers. Wow, what better job is there? You're constantly trying to sell something. Maybe maybe even police when it comes to detectives. Maybe that's a good area too. I would suspect it. I really like the TV series Sherlock. And the one thing I don't like, it's kind of cute, where he says, "I'm not a psychopath. I am a high-functioning sociopath." The thing is, I've dealt with this on previous shows, had experts point out there really is not any such thing as a difference between a psychopath and a sociopath in the strict psychological sense, okay? But let's just say Sherlock is a sociopath. Well, he's able to analyze and get into the mind of his opponents, and he sees them as opponents. It's like a game to him. So he wants to find a criminal. He is seeing this as a big chess game. So this is actually, I think it's a fairly good representation of how a psychopath, or like some people would say a sociopath, would see life and its challenges. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, does this mean that everyone who acts in a cold and detached way is a psychopath? No. I think that, like, for instance, I'm a big fan also of Walking Dead. And you see character development in many of the main characters that were in the show in the very first season. And they go from being nice to showing all the signs of psychopathy. And I think I suspect that's what they will do to the, quote, nice characters in Fear the Walking Dead. That as time goes on, if they survive these characters, then they'll have them develop more and more psychopathy, which I guess would go into, I can't remember his name, it's a long Polish name, but he wrote the book about ponerology, that when psychopaths control a situation, the people around them become like secondary psychopaths. They start adopting psychopathic ways of behaving. But ultimately, I think that psychopaths are actually born that way. They're not. And then their environment will determine which direction they take. So anyway, another aspect that's very important, other than the Machiavellianism, is they do not respect authority in the least. Now, that doesn't mean they may not agree with authority. They may be the most loyal person to their boss or to their religion that you'll ever encounter. But that loyalty is more, if I'm going to use an analogy, I would say they're more like cats rather than dogs when it comes to loyalty. I personally think cats are very psychopathic, ultimately. But your relationship with a cat is sort of on its own terms. Sometimes it'll just come up and be very affectionate, and you're like, "Oh, I love my kitty," and then it'll bite you and then run off because it's had enough. Dogs, you can treat them, really horribly, and they will still be loyal to you to the very end. And ultimately, psychopaths, I think, are more like cats. And I think it's ironic that, many people in society just adore cats, just the same way as many people adore psychopaths. So when they're on TV shows and stuff like that, like I said, Sherlock, I think he's a good example. James Bond, archetypical example. And there's a few others I won't go into right now, but essentially, people like it. There's something dark about them. They're willing to do what they want and get away with it. And humans like that to a large degree, but most people have too much guilt and too much empathy to do it themselves. But anyway, the thing is that when it comes to their view of society, and, I had a guest on a while back that said that maybe this explains why many people are very heroic and also psychopathic. They look at rules as something they evaluate constantly. What's the cost and what's the benefit of following that rule? Will this make me a happier person if I follow this rule? They will not just adopt it. And if they feel that there's too much of a punishment if they break the rule, they'll find a way that they won't get caught. So they're thrill seekers to a large degree. Oh, there's a rule against this. I wonder if I can get away with it. Let's see. And that's how they see authority. Okay? Now, if they're authority, watch out. Again, like I said earlier, they project out their feelings, feeling like everyone is the same way. So they don't trust people so much. And, they're thinking, okay, well, gotta be firm, gotta be strict, like a leader. Hammer people down when they misbehave. So ultimately, again, the person who has psychopathic tendencies, ultimately, the person that has these traits will tend to question authority a lot, which often makes them very dynamic. People like people who are willing to buck the system. And so this has an attractive energy about them. But they also realize how to do it and get away with it. How to be able to get around rules. So, maybe this is one reason why you might find a lot of lawyers. But also they're very analytical. And so ultimately, too, since you can combine trying to get to the root of something with a very low level of empathy, which often empathy clouds our vision. Actually, I will point this out. I just read recently a study that indicated that people with high empathy tend to be a little, more violent than people with low levels of empathy. But anyway, that's going to be another show in the future. But the thing is, emergency room doctors tend to be more likely, there's a higher level of psychopaths in that profession than in the general population. And maybe it's because they, like I use example Sherlock, are looking at everything as a challenge, and they want to find out what they can do, and they want to prove themselves, and maybe gain a little bit of attention, a little bit of honor, a little bit of praise, because ultimately that will feed into the narcissistic aspect of psychopathy. And yeah, psychopaths have a high level of feeling that they are somewhat the center of the universe. When they walk in the room, they tend to let everyone know that they are the center. So again, this is not a discussion in how to spot a psychopath. It is more like how to understand them and how to, at least, dare I say, have a little empathy for people with psychopathy. At least maybe now you'll understand your politicians a little bit more. I'd like to encourage people to visit my website at michaelcross.net, or if you want to see or hear past shows that we've done, you can visit my YouTube station at Michael Cross, and it's the one where when you type it in, it'll state Freedom from Conscience, my book series. To distinguish from many of the other Michael Crosses, it seems to be a fairly common name. Anyway, that's all for this evening, and thank you for tuning in, and hope you come back next week for another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV.
Bernays was constantly marinating Freud's ideas. They both knew propaganda worked, and they loved experimenting and trying new grandiose projects. I had heard that before from someone that looked at people as animals, and they could be experimented with. George Soros, listen to this.
When you try to, improve society, you affect different people and different interests differently. So you very often have all kinds of unintended adverse consequences. So I had to experiment. That was a lot of fun, and that's actually what got me hooked on this whole enterprise.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.TV.